All right. Okay, so without further ado, we are on page... I should start putting that in the handouts, the page number. But we are on page 44, which means we're in chapter 2. I will remind everybody, and for those that weren't here last week, there's quite a few of you, I'll just mention it again, that the framework or the format that we've chosen for this class is specifically not text-based, meaning it's exact text, and we're going to give over the content of chapter 2. We might have to do a little chair shuffling. Are you two, Elise, or just one?
I dropped.
She's not good. Okay, no problem. Okay, so then just choose any seat. Well, yeah, anywhere is fine. I was going to say we have to do some chair shuffling because we need two next to each other. So as I was saying, so chapter 2, but I was going to give a little preface for those that weren't here last week with regards to the format of the class, right? So the format of the class is we've chosen that even though it is text-based, it's based on the Tanya, I've chosen to let you guys do that on your own. I've done a little sizing up of the crowd, and most people look like they're perfectly fine reading through a book or reading through a text. What the goal of our getting together once a week is the idea is to go a little bit beneath the text, right? So we'll cover the entire chapter, right, which is what I prepare in advance, so the summary of the entire chapter. Then as we go through it, we'll discuss each one, giving more analogies and more clarification as we go through. That being said, today we are holding chapter 2 on page 44, and we'll go through it together between the handout and the book. So last week we spoke about, so firstly we introduced this novel concept that we are a dual personality. We do have two neshamas inside of us. We analyzed it at great length based on textual sources. Neshamot ani asiti, which means I created souls in the plural, hinting at the fact that God created us with two souls. We spoke about the Arizal and the Ramchal and all of those great Kabbalists who introduced us to the concept that a person has two souls within him. And we chose to start with the animal soul. And we spoke about the reason why we chose to start with the animal soul, and that's because naturally that's the first soul that comes into a person. And that soul gives a person life, right? So that soul gives a person his natural tendencies. We spoke about how most of those tendencies are negative. Anger, haughtiness, lustful desires, petty thoughts, petty speech. These types of tendencies usually come from the animalistic soul. And then that there are some positive traits which also come from there, namely compassion and mercy, right? Which also come from the animalistic soul. And we spoke about the reason for that, which is that the animalistic soul finds its source in what we call kalipa. Right, so kalipa, we said literally translated is shell or peel, right? And that while the peel is there, meaning that the peel is not the main part of the fruit, it's not the essence of the fruit, and that's not what we're there for. And obviously, the point is to get past the peel, but the peel does protect. And so it has in it, especially again depending which souls, without getting too caught up in it, but. Definitely, there is the Jewish soul has both good traits and bad traits that come from it. One more point: we also mentioned that this does not mean that a human being is essentially bad. And when we say that this soul is a natural soul, we're not saying that the human being is naturally bad, right? We're just saying that the what is Freud used the id, right, or the desire for self-preservation or selfish existence. Those tendencies come from the animalistic soul. Now, some of those end up being good, right? I mean, we're not here to discuss Freud, but even the great psychologists discussed that sometimes good tendencies can also be selfish or part of our, right? So that can also be all part of this. That's why we call it natural. That's not to say that a person is naturally evil or naturally bad or naturally negative or anything along those lines. Okay? And that summarizes what we discussed in the first chapter. And without further ado, we will move on to probably the main topic of our conversation, which is the more mysterious part of us, right? So the fact that we have natural tendencies is something we all can understand. And in section 2, in chapter 2, Right at the beginning, the Alter Rebbe begins with the words "V'nefesh hashenit b'Yisrael hi chelek Elokam himal mamash," which means that the second soul, which is contained within every single Jew, is a portion of God from above, literally. Okay. The reason I chose to read those words in English, inside the text, is because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here. Okay, so our goal for today is to try to understand the source, the origin of the godly soul, and as a result, to understand how it affects us. Once we understand where it comes from, we can understand where it's going, right? How it affects us and how it drives us, and therefore, if we're going to attempt to get more in tune with our godly soul as opposed to our animal soul, how we're going to do that. Yes, Jordan.
So if somebody's a non-Jew, they only have nefesh behemik, the animal soul only, right?
They have an animalistic soul, correct. On a simple level, correct.
And the same one that
correct.
we have.
Meaning it also depends what type of non-Jews. By non-Jews, you're correct in the fact that a Jew, by nature, has a divine spark within him, which inherently makes him have a good tendency and a drive to do good. Whether he gets in touch with that or not is a good question. By non-Jews, it would depend. There are non-Jews that are destined to be evil, for lack of a better word. Call them, let's say evil non-Jews, right? That's what you find by non-Jews sometimes. So one of the classic examples is Paro, for instance. And there is a big discussion among the sages, very philosophical, about whether he had freedom of choice or not. And that touches, the reason why this touches on this conversation is because if he had a godly soul and an animalistic soul, then he obviously had freedom of choice, right? Because he could have tapped into either one, right? Just like either one of us does, and followed that, right? So think Paro, think Hitler, may his name be obliterated, right? But there definitely are instances where a non-Jew does not have a choice. But let's keep, so I just wanted to touch on that. But to keep our conversation for probably the majority of non-Jews, what we call Chazdei Umot Ha'olam, right? Which means nations of the world that are good people, that are right, that are etc. So then that would not necessarily be the case. They have a touch of a good soul inside them as well. Correct.
There are many Jews with evil.
So right, so that I think that's the point that Jordan was getting at. Most importantly, that according to the Tanya, every single Jew has a neshama, has a soul, no matter what. Right? And we could argue about what the difference is, but about what I'm going to say. But Tanya would argue that every single Jew has a good soul, has divine spark within them. If a Jew is evil, which we are very well aware that they can be, then they're covering over their godly spark. They're choosing to be in tune with their animalistic soul, as opposed to the evil non-Jews, Paro, Hitler, as examples. They are not necessarily choosing to be under that. So in a way, that makes them better, 100%. Meaning in a way that just makes them tools of God for what He wants to happen in the world.
But then, where does a non-Jew get the idea that he should be good or not good, or specifically good?
From his neshama, from his soul. From his soul, which has good and bad in it. You're talking about it. That's not true. He does have. He has a soul, and that soul has good and bad in it, and he can tap into either the good or the bad, 100%. Okay. But so I just want to answer your question, because I think your question was based on the fact that the Alter Rebbe chooses here to say Nefesh Hashenit b'Yisrael, the second neshama in the Jewish people, and that's because in the previous chapter, at the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe already discussed that non-Jews depends on the non-Jew. Yes.
When a person converts, do they acquire?
Yes, 100%.
It just comes to him?
100%. Does it just come to him? That's a good question. It's a discussion. It's a discussion among Kabbalists, I think. I was going to say in the Talmud, but I don't think it's discussed in the Talmud. I think it's discussed in the Kabbalah. Whether it's something that there's definitely something that they acquire upon becoming Jewish. There is a discussion about the fact that they have something inside of them even pre-becoming Jewish, which is what inspired them to be Jewish, right, to become Jewish, 100%. Okay. Without further ado, so we want to talk about the source, the origin of the godly soul, and where it's going as a result. Right. So, what is the origin of the godly soul? So, we choose first of all to quote from Eov or Job, where it says a nefesh hashenit. Where it says Chelek Elokam Mimal Mamash Mimal, where that phrase starts, Chelek Elokam Mimal, which means a portion of God above. Okay? Now, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, chooses to add the word Mamash, which means literally. Okay? And then he starts a conversation about what the source of the soul is, right? So, to understand the source of the soul, let's go back all the way to the beginning, right? The first soul was blown into Adam. How do I know it was blown? Why do I use the word blown? Because the phrase used in the verse is Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim, which means that God blew into Adam a neshama, a soul of life. Okay? Now, if the verse would have said, and God inserted into Adam a soul of life, we would have been just as well aware, right? Had the verse said he brought into Adam, he imbibed, imbued within Adam a soul of life, we also would have been just fine. What is this concept of blowing, right? So the Zohar, right, foremost Kabbalistic texts, and one of the texts upon which the Tanya is based, elaborates on what blowing is, right? And the Zohar explains. There are two ways that we emit air from our mouths, right? One way is when we talk, right? And usually for a healthy human being, there isn't that much effort exerted into talking, into speech, right? We talk. We can talk for hours on end. Some people show us that, and we don't get tired, right? But bring a balloon, try to blow up a balloon once, twice, 3 times, you're out of breath, and you're right? Why is that? That's because
you lose the carbon dioxide in your blood.
Again?
You lose the carbon dioxide in your blood.
I wasn't aware of the technical terms, but one of the reasons for that is because we're not just letting out air, right? When we talk, we're letting out little bits of air that are very external air. This part of our body, if it's being used very, very subtly, right? When we blow, we go, right? That comes out from inside of us. That's why this is used as an analogy for the soul, right? God did not speak the soul of Adam into him, even though God spoke to the rest of the world, right? With regards to the rest of the world, we are told, Vayomer Elokim yehi or, God said, let there be light, and Vayehi or, there was light, right? Vayomer Elokim tacheh haaretz dasha, God said, let the earth spring forth with greenery, etc., right? And it did. It did so. Most of creation was done through speech. Parentheses, part 2 of Tanya talks about what these things mean. We're not going to get into this, right? And we spoke about this at the introduction of Tanya. If you remember, that Tanya is comprised of 5 sections. In section 2, it talks about creation and how that process worked, etc. Right? We're not here today to talk about that. End parentheses. When it came to the soul, God blew the soul into Adam. In other words, something much more internal, from inside God, so to speak. Right? Just like when we blow, something comes, right? The Torah talks in the vernacular of human beings, right? So as a way of explaining to us the difference between what creation was and what a soul was, creation was sort of like this external thing, right? All this, it's all just external. Our soul was blown into us. In other words, it came from an internal part of God, right? And that is the source for V'nefesh hashenit b'Yisrael hi chelek elokah, that it's a piece of God, that it's a part of God that's within us. It's a divine soul. It's a spark of God, right? All these terms that we use are, in other words, there's something godly within us. Right? We don't call it the good soul, the holy soul, the godly soul. It's actually a piece of God. Now, another hint to this is actually in the words of Job, right? So it says, Yichelek Elokah, it is a portion of God. What's the next word? Mimal, which means from above. Now, for those of you that have a little bit of background in Hebrew, so you'll know the word Mimal is really the third step of saying above, right? Al means above, right? Everybody knows El Al, right? El Al means to above, right? Which I guess is why they chose the name for the G-dly, right? So Al means above, means on, means over, right? So that's already up. Me'al means above Al, right? So even higher than, right? So sometimes when somebody wants
higher
to say
above.
That something was above something else, they say it was even, Me'al, whatever it is. And mi ma'al
means like
is
from above.
Correct. Right? But so mi ma'al, well, in this context of looking at it, mi ma'al means above. What is above? What is above? And these 3 levels are referring to, you can see this in our fourth bullet point for today in our handout, that 1258. So there is action, right? And this touches on concepts which are introduced later on in Tanya, but just to give you the idea, right? There is action, there is speech, and there is thought, right? And the three of them. So action is a very external thing, a very external action, for lack of a better word, or a very external way of interacting with the world, right? Sometimes we do something, we give something to someone, right? That's a very external way of doing something. Speech is a little bit more internal, right? We can interact, we can exchange ideas, etc. Thought is really the highest level. Thought is, the most internal. That's why we don't even do it with other people, right? If we were to somehow telepathically connect with other people, which has its validity, meaning the Talmud talks about when a person thinks about someone, the other person feels it, etc., whatever. But thought is the highest level, the most internal level of the human being, right? And that is the source of our neshama. The thought of God, right? The thoughts of God, the intellect of God, that's where the neshama comes from. Now, a little more background, right? So, but before we get to that, let's get that in a moment, right? So let's just take that as it is at face value for now, right? So the neshama, the soul, the source of it is in the thought process of God. Now, so still we haven't gotten to understand how it's a piece of God, right? If somebody says that this thing was inspired by this person's thoughts, that doesn't make this person and this thing one, right? Neither does this make, let's say the iPod was inspired by Steve Jobs, right? It doesn't make the iPod and Steve Jobs one. It makes him the creator of the iPod, etc. But how is the iPod a piece of Steve Jobs? That's not true, right? So here's where we have to understand the difference between a human being and God, right? So with regards to a human being, because a human being is finite or limited, right? So there's me, and there's my thoughts. And even though they're very intertwined, my thoughts can be removed from me, right? In fact, I can think of things that I don't agree with, right? I can think of an idea that's preposterous to me or doesn't make sense to me, doesn't resonate within me. Why is that? It's because my thoughts and me are, while intertwined and very much related, are not related, are not one, right? Speech, never mind, right? Lots of human beings go about the whole day being what the Torah calls echad b'peh v'echad b'lev, one in their mouth and one in their heart. Very different, right? Speaking one way but feeling a different way, right? Telling people the opposite of what they feel. Actions, definitely, right? People say actions speak louder than words, but that's like a sort of twist the other way. But on a very literal level, a person's actions do not necessarily reflect who he is, right? There can be other motives at play. So that's by human beings. By God, let's talk about thought specifically, right? Before we even get to speech and action. By thought, the Rambam, Maimonides, famously uses the term Hu Hamada, V'hu Yadua, V'hu Yodea. And that's the last bullet point in the first section. God is the knower, God is the knowledge, and God is the known. Right? So the iPod was inspired by Steve Jobs. Right? So Steve Jobs thought about the iPod. Right? So there's Steve Jobs, the knower. He was the one who knew. He was the one who was doing the thinking. The iPod was the known, the thing that was being known. And then there was the knowledge. Right? The process of him knowing or thinking about that iPod. By God, all three of those are one. And the Rambam immediately gives a disclaimer. And this concept, this is where you touch on Maimonides as philosopher, but even in his philosophy, he understood there are certain things, it is not within a human being's grasp to understand this concept. Because God created us in this way. God created us as finite human beings. There's a person and he knows something, and that thing is known. And there are three different, we can't wrap our brains around how they're all one. And we can say those words over and over again, but we can't really internalize their meaning. But taking them at their value, we can now understand what it means that a person has inside of him a piece of God. Why? Because if our neshama stems from the thoughts of God, right, which is a humanistic analogy for a certain level of God, and that level of God we say is really all one with God Himself. So we have inside each and every one of us a piece of God Himself. Okay? Now, what do we mean by thoughts? Right? Why do we say that the soul is sourced in the thoughts of God? So in order to get to that, let's start off asking a different question, right? So if all souls come from the same place, come from the thought of God, and that's their source, and they're all there together in one harmonious unit. In fact, you can't even tell one apart from the other, and then somehow they come down and they enclose themselves in different human beings, right? Are all souls equal?
No.
So, before we answer that question, so I want to do two things. First of all, I want to open up parentheses to say that in chapter 32 of Tanya, which we're holding chapter 2, chapter 32, or the Hebrew numerical value of the word lev, which means heart, the Alter Rebbe chooses to talk about the mitzvah of the heart, which is to love a fellow Jew. And in that chapter, this point becomes very, very important. Meaning, because it's one of the things we struggle with when we try to love another Jew is, I'm me and he's him, right? I'm me and she's she. And how can I love this person when they have this flaw, or they have that flaw, or I don't like this about them, or I don't like that about them, right? But when we strip away the external parts of our life and we get to our core, I'm in the Neshama and that person's in the Neshama, and really all our Neshamas are one, and the source of all our Neshamas are one, then it becomes much easier to love that other person. And we're in parentheses. That's discussed in chapter 32. Now, but in order to get to whether soul, right? Let's try to answer this question: are all souls equal because they all come from the same place? Are they all equal or not? So Tanya introduces an analogy, and that analogy is the process of the development of the fetus, right? So, if you grow up in a family with more than one child, you'll know that not all children are equal, right? Even if they do come from the same father and mother, right? Not from separate marriage, from the same marriage, right? Same drop of sperm that entered the same uterus and developed, right, in the same environment. And yet when it came out, not only do they not have the same personality or think the same or feel the same, but they could even look completely different, right? Why is that, right? I believe that there were those that examined this actually from a biological standpoint, from a medical perspective, and they came to the same conclusion. But definitely in terms of on a spiritual level, we are told that the source of that drop of sperm originates in the father's brain, as opposed to other parts of the anatomy that you might think. Which is why we're going to talk about it in a moment, but which is why we say that during intimate relations, a husband and wife should make sure that their thoughts are aligned and that their thoughts are pure and that their thoughts are holy. And that's, by the way, not a Kabbalistic thing. Whatever, we'll get to it in a moment. We're going to talk about it in a moment. But what happens after that? Right, so the source is all the same. They all these two human beings, which are here in front of us, two brothers, come from the same place, right? Or a brother and a sister, they come from the same place. What happens? What happens is that in the fetus, there's a developmental process, right? Over the course of that developmental process, they develop differently. So the answer to our original question, which is, are all souls equal, is that in their origin, yes, all souls are equal. If you strip away everything, you come back to the origin of the soul, they're exactly the same. But by the time it reaches our body and it gets enclosed in our body, our souls have a different personality, so to speak, or a different, facade, or a different. Now, at their core, at the same point, they're connected to the same godly source, right? But they do develop differently, and we're going to talk about that process a little bit more now. On an even further level, by the way. So we chose to talk about this as two different human beings, but think about it in one human being, right? So one human being definitely comes from the same place, right? But somehow, in the developmental stage, inside the womb, parts of that, what originally was a drop of sperm, then become different parts of the body, right? On a simple level, a hand or a leg, but even think about the toenails, which also must come from the same source. Right? And the brain, which also comes from the same source. There's no question that by the time they come out of the body, all doctors will agree that the brain is just slightly more complicated than the toenail. Yes?
When souls develop either within a lifetime or over the span of multiple lifetimes, does that mean that they're further away from God due to their development
So first of
like,
all,
or like a new soul or a soul that's like recently developed, is that closer to God because it's like just from God with no development whatsoever?
right. So if I understand your question, you're making the assumption that because a soul is more exposed to the world, therefore they're further from God.
That's
right?
the question.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I would posit to you that possibly it's the opposite. Possibly some souls come down here to this world, and with their development in this world, become closer to God.
So when they initially start out, does that mean that they're not close to God? Like God.
Well, their source is a piece of God itself,
right?
But in terms of levels of holiness or how holy they are, it's possible for a human being to even better his soul and further his soul along, right? There's a great song by a man named Abi Rottenberg called "Come With Me, Little Neshamala." You can YouTube it if you'd like. "Come With Me, Little Neshamala" by Abi Rottenberg, in which he goes through a medrash, based on a medrash. The medrash talks about the fact that before a soul comes down into this world, right, so the soul is, in the words of the medrash, it's under the heavenly chair, right, under the heavenly throne. Right? So in other words, it's with God Himself. Right? Then comes this angel along and says, "Come with me, little neshamala." Right? It's time to go for a trip. And he says, "Look, we're going down to the world. That's it." And the soul is kicking, screaming. It doesn't want to go down. I'm going to go down into this physical world. Look at these people. They're busy with physical pursuits their entire life. Right? Here I am in this spiritual bliss. And as they're going on their tour, so to speak, before he gets let down into the world, a tour of this world, the neshama feels this holiness, right? It perceives this human being doing a mitzvah, right? Here's a Jew putting on tefillin, or lighting Shabbos candles, whatever it is, right? And it's this unbelievable radiance that he's not accustomed to feeling, even higher than he can ever understand. So he tells the malach, he tells the angel, "Promise me that when I go down into this world, I'm going to be doing that." And so the angel says, "I can't promise you nothing, but I'm showing it to you, like that you should realize that this is what this is what you should strive for." Then the neshama goes down into this world. Then in the song they have like a little interlude of just musical whatever. At the end he says, starts again, "Come with me, little neshama," right? Because the angel comes to take the soul away from the body after 70, 80, 90 years in this world, right? 120 years in this world. The soul has to go. It's time to meet its maker, right? Like we say. And again, the soul is kicking and screaming and saying, "I don't want to go. The ability that I have to do a mitzvah down here, leave me here to do one more mitzvah." And the angel says, "No, it's time to go now. Now it's time to go." And then the neshama goes back up above. And that's obviously a medrash, and right, it uses poetic. Not to say the medrash isn't exact. Medrash is exact. But it goes through it in story format. But the point of the matter is that sometimes a soul down here in this world can actually accomplish more. Not sometimes. The goal is for a soul to accomplish more down here in this physical world than it could have up above. In the words of somewhere, I don't know where. I have the words in my head. I don't know if it's from the Talmud or from Kabbalah or where it's from, but it's Yerida L'Tzorach Aliyah, that the soul comes down here. It's a descent in order to ascend. The point is to go down in order to go up. Meaning it's a descent. It comes down into this world. Down, we call it down into this world, right? We don't call it, being uplifted to the physical world. But the point is for it to reach a higher level. Okay, so that's the answer to our question. The answer to our question is that all souls are equal in their source, but over the development process, the souls can develop in different ways. And therefore, there are truly higher souls and lower souls. Okay? Which leads us to section 3. Okay, so we're on page 52. And we're going to talk a little bit about a leader's soul, right? Or a tzaddik, a righteous person. And this ties very much into the fact that we spoke a little bit historically about when the Tanya came around, and that part of the Tanya was the fact that there was Chassidus, right? Was the introduction of Chassidus and the introduction of a Rebbe, which means a Jewish leader. Now, Jewish leaders were around before Rebbes. They might have gone by different names, right? But this ties very, very much in with the Alter Rebbe's practical approach to the world, which was that a Chassid or a Jew needs a Rebbe in his life. Let's talk about this. And we're definitely, the Alter Rebbe, especially introducing such a novel concept, I don't know if novel is the right word, but definitely by introducing this concept, he's going to bring sources that predate Chassidus or Kabbalah, or that come from the revealed part of the Torah, the regular part of Torah, for lack of a better phrase. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe starts by discussing the fact that in the Torah, in Numbers 13:3, the Torah gives us a mandate, u'ledafkabo. There is a mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, to cleave to God, to become one with God, to I don't know what a better word is, to connect to God, right? Now, on a very, very simple level, there should be a very simple question here. And that is, we are finite human beings. How is it possible for us to cleave or to connect to God? Right? How is that even a thing? Right? God is infinite. God has no limitations. God is everything. Right? We say even we are God. The table is God. The chairs are God. God is everything. God is infinite. How is it possible for something finite and something infinite to connect? How does that even begin to make sense? Right? And so the Rambam right away immediately tells us that the mitzvah of the dafkabo, the mitzvah to connect to God, is accomplished by connecting to Talmidei Chachamim, by connecting with sages, with righteous men, with people of moral, upstanding character, who have worked in themselves, people who keep Torah and mitzvahs to the T, etc. With holy sages, with holy rabbis, and that is the way to connect with God. Right now, question: how does that work? I have to connect with a human being. I'm not connected with God, right? So to this, the Alter Rebbe comes to explain. Okay, so first of all, it's important to understand that now that we have a little bit of an understanding as to the fact that all neshamas come from the same source, that all souls come from the same source, it makes a little bit more sense, right? If I'll use myself as an example, if I am a toenail neshama, right, going back to the development of the fetus, right? If I am a neshama which is on a very, very low level, and that's the neshama that I have, then the best way for me to connect with the source of the neshamas, with God, is to go through a brain neshama, right? To go through a neshama which is on a much higher level. Think about even a human being, right? We are told that a child, even after he comes out into this world, and even after he becomes an adult, has direct connection with his father through his brain. Why is that? Because his source is in his father's brain. That's where he originated, going back even before conception, right? Even right during conception. So therefore, when he comes out into this world, he has a special connection with his father's brain, right? The moach haben, the moach ha'av, the brain, the intellect of the child, and intellect of the father, have a strong connection, right? Now, does this mean that the toenail of the child doesn't have a connection? It does have a connection, right? But the toenail of the child, or the entire body of the child, has this deep connection with the father through the brain, right? Similarly, by a Jew's strongest or most direct way to connect to God is through the tzaddik of his generation, through his rebbe or his talmid chacham or his leader. Why? Because the neshama of that person is on a much higher level. Okay, now the best analogy for this is something that people used to love asking the rebbe about. Of course, the rebbe, they would analyze their relationship with the rebbe. They would ask these type of questions to the rebbe, and the rebbe would give an example of that the concept is not. And this is very important to understand. The point we're making here is not that this neshama cannot connect to God, or that this neshama connects to God through the Rebbe, and without the Rebbe it can't. What's the point here? The point here is, and the analogy that the Rebbe would always use is of an electric powerhouse, right, and a lamp, right. So the electric powerhouse is God in this regard. The lamp is the human being, right. But for the lamp to connect to the electric powerhouse is impossible if there isn't a circuit switch in between that sort of switches it on and helps it, puts it in touch with its source, right? So there's that. And as a result, the best example used for a Rebbe is not something that's higher head and shoulders above, but rather something that's in between. Right? The word that Hasidus uses all the time for a Rebbe is memutza mechaber, which means an intermediary which connects two things. It's like a pipe that connects two things, right? We are souls struggling to get in touch with our source. A Rebbe or a leader, a Jewish leader, helps us get in touch with our source by helping to turn on our spark, not by introducing something that we don't have, because we are neshamas, right? And we have that connection to God, to godliness itself. We have a spark of godliness inside of us. We really don't need any help. What we need is guidance. We really don't need. So help is the wrong word. We don't need any novel concepts, or any new introductions, or any new. Nobody needs to give us something in order to connect to God. We have that direct connection to God. What we need is for somebody to help us find that switch. For somebody to help us
turn it on.
Turn it on.
Conduit.
A conduit, yeah. Best word, I think. That's the best word from Memutza Mechaber, which means an intermediary which connects two things. Not an intermediary which introduces new concepts, but rather just a connection, right? Like a conduit. And so that sheds a little bit of light onto what it means that there are higher souls or lower souls, right? Again, that doesn't mean that at their source they're different. It doesn't mean that any of them has less of a connection to God. What it means is that in their development, one of them is more in tune with their connection to God, right? And one of the things we're going to talk about over the course of our Tanya class is with whichever soul we have, getting more in tune with God. In other words, getting more in tune with our neshama, getting more in tune with our soul, which is obviously the eventual goal we're trying to get to. Okay.
So you would say that
Yes.
the Lubavitcher Rebbe is more like Ephraim than Menashe,
In what sense?
in the sense that he would like embrace like technology like television, in the sense that he would like see it as a good thing.
So you're touching on lots of other concepts. On a simple level, and let's go back to our analogy. The concept is a switch. The concept is to help us, to guide us in getting in touch with ourselves. Is one of the methods for that embracing technology? That's a whole different discussion. Whether Torah's approach is to use technology or not use technology, right? Whether in general we stick away from things that may harm us but can be good for us, right? Because they may harm us. It's a whole different discussion. I don't know that relates to this.
It's more like a partial question, I guess.
I guess so. So I'm also not familiar with this concept of Ephraim and Menashe. Ephraim was more worldly than Menashe. Is that true?
Right.
I think, right. We are getting a little sidetracked. I just want to make sure to embrace your point. To understand your, I think you're referring to the fact that Ephraim would help out Yosef with it, right? He was in the room with him, translating for him, etc. Is that what you're referring to?
Ephraim means to like be fruitful and to.
In terms of the names and their Kabbalistic sources.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's definitely a whole different discussion. I'm gonna bypass.
Sure.
I'm gonna take a pass on answering that question just because I think we'll get too sidetracked. Okay. From here, the Alter Rebbe segues into talking about one more thing. The Alter Rebbe wants to introduce one more concept, which is garments. Okay, and before the Alter Rebbe talks about that, the Alter Rebbe begins by asking a question. He quotes the Zohar, and the Zohar says that when parents conduct themselves with holiness during conception, the soul conceived will be of a purer nature. And we touched upon this earlier, right? And I said, let's pause on it because we're going to talk about it later, and that's now. In other words, that when, right, that we're obviously faced with a choice anytime we're intimate with our spouse, that we can choose to think about holy things and to act in a holy way, to act in a refined way, or we can choose to make it a vulgar, pleasurable experience and just all about ourselves, not about something higher. And this touches, by the way, a lot on the laws, actually, of intimacy in Judaism. I don't think that's a conversation for now, but let's at least try to touch on this point, right? Because this would seemingly contradict what we just said about souls have their, every soul comes from the same origin, and then at a certain point there's the developmental process, and that developmental process, by the way, is not conception. We're not talking about conception. We're talking about as it traverses through spiritual realms, Atzilot, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, all the spiritual realms, until it comes down here into this world. So where does this element of the human being, the father or the mother, having the ability to affect the child that comes out, or not just the child, but it says the soul of the child. Right? How does that come about? So here the Alter Rebbe introduces the concept of garments. Right? So let's talk about physical garments for a second, and then we'll understand why this analogy of garments is used. Right? What are physical garments? What are physical clothing in general in this world? Right? Clothing are used as a message to the world, as a way of our signaling the world, this is who I am. Right? First of all, this is why at business or during our leisure time or during sports, during other things, we wear different types of clothing, right? But much more importantly, let's take even one of those categories, right? Just say during business, each person wears a different type of garment, and that's because they're trying to signal they're trying to give off a certain impression about themselves, right? This is not necessarily just external, by the way, this could be very internal. They are embracing a certain element of themselves, and this is the message, this is the way they would like to interact with you, right? Think about professionals wearing a suit and tie, especially in today's day and age with all the tech startup people like to walk around in whatever it is, turtlenecks and sweatpants or whatever it is, right? So yeah, obviously on a certain level it has to do with comfort, right? And like what we're comfortable wearing, right? But then there's things that have nothing to do with comfort. People choose to wear certain things regardless of their comfort level. In fact, sometimes it's very uncomfortable, right? Or a little too comfortable for that person's nature. And yet, we wear certain clothing in order to send certain signals. In other words, in order to send a message to you, I would like to interact with you in this manner. Right? Same reason why before I give a class, I'll put on a tie. Or before I give a sermon, I'll put on a tie. Right? So as to send the message, I am in a formal position now, right? But then, if I'm playing basketball with someone, then I'll wear other attire, right? Why is that? Because clothing, garments are our way of interacting with the world. Does that mean that's who we really are? No. Is it fake? Also not. It's just a method that we use for interacting with the world. Similarly, the soul has clothing. The soul has garments. And those garments are created, not just developed, not just inspired, but created during the garments, not the body. We're not talking about the body here. The body is conceived during intimate relations between the father and mother, right? But even more than that, the spiritual garment, the spiritual way, manner, fashion that this soul is going to interact with the world is created by the father and mother and based on their conduct during relations. That's a lot of pressure. So first of all, on a simple level, to answer our question, that's why the Zohar tells us that when parents conduct themselves with holiness during conception, the soul conceived will be of a pure nature. But on an even deeper level, that also gives us a little bit more of an understanding as to how sometimes you can have, very, very different types of people being born from very different types of people. So sometimes you have parents that are, right, and sometimes this is counterintuitive. Sometimes you have parents that are of a very vulgar nature, let's say, right? And then you find out that they have a child who's like the biggest tzaddik in the world, right? Classic example is Avraham and Terach, right? Abraham, our forefather, Avraham Avinu, was one of the holiest people that exist in the world, right? He developed monotheism, meaning he recognized God for the first time in this world, and yet his father owned an idol shop, right? He was like the source of idol worship, right? And how can this happen? So a little more on just a cosmic level, there is a little element of keeping the balance here. God does sometimes sneak, so to speak, a very holy soul under the guise of someone who's very unholy in order to sort of keep the balance. But on a much simpler level, it's because it's there's a lot of elements at play here, right? There's the soul, the way it comes down here into this world, and that's a piece of God. And then there's the way it develops as it goes through, as it traverses through the physical, the spiritual world. And then when it finally makes it down here, there's even the garment which the parents develop. Okay, so just to summarize, the reason we're talking about all these things is because we're trying to get in touch with our godly soul. And I know that today we left off on a very spiritual level, but the idea is to understand where the godly soul comes from, right? And most importantly, the idea is to understand that the soul that's inside of us is a piece of God, is a spark of God. It's not a will, it's not a desire, it's not an inclination to do good. It's not even a soul which comes from somewhere else which inspires us to do good. It is inherently holy. It is inherently godly. Forget holy. Godly. It is a piece of God. As a result, right, like when we were talking about the Rebbe, right, and we said it would be heresy to say that the Rebbe has to introduce something to our soul in order for us to get in touch with God. No. We each contain within ourselves a piece of God, a godly soul. And all that we really need to do is to get in touch with it. And later on, we're going to talk about how inspiring that is and how empowering that is. I think you understand the beginning of it. The beginnings of it are that we don't have to do that much. We don't have to split the Red Sea in order to become good people. We just have to get in touch with ourselves. Okay, so we'll leave it off here this week. Oh yeah, that was an easy class. Light stuff.
You ignited the godliness in us.
So that's all good, huh? I hate to break it to you, but the work is on you, not on me.
Did you have the camera
I just
on?
introduced it because but I'm going to cut
the whole thing.